Hi everybody, this is 6.2, Leaders and Events of the Civil War. The objective of today is you will be able to identify Civil War leaders and explain the significance behind the Emancipation Proclamation and the Gettysburg Address by completing a political cartoon analysis. On the left-hand side, you're going to be taking coronal notes today. There are quite a few slides today. You're going to need one for North versus South, African Americans in the war, leaders for the Union, leaders for the Confederate, the Emancipation Proclamation, and the Gettysburg Address. Differences between the North and the South. The North had a much larger population. They had more factories, so they were able to produce more goods. Oh, sorry, battery's running low. So they had larger populations, more factories. They had control over the Navy because the government was there, the federal government was there. They also had the railroad in the North. They were able to finance the war because, again, the federal government, with taxes and borrowing. Not everyone, though, supported everything to do with the war. There was a group of people in the North called the Copperheads, and they were Northern Democrats who were pro-slavery. So even though we'll talk about the Emancipation Proclamation today, but there were slaves that did exist in some areas of the North, especially in border states. South had fewer people. Not everybody supported the recession, so not everybody supported leaving the Union. They used slaves as labor, so more men were able to fight in the war. They had Robert E. Lee as a general. He was one of the strongest generals. The North wanted him to fight for them as well, but he chose to stay with Virginia and fought for the South. They were doing their fighting on their home ground, and they were used to handling guns and horses. They were a little bit more able to, or have better fighting skills. One of the major issues, though, was that the Confederates lacked, or the Confederate Congress lacked power. So because all of the states succeeded independently, they didn't really have a strong unified government. And as we saw underneath the Articles of Confederation, that's not effective for trying to conduct business as a country. African Americans were a big part of the war itself. In 1862, Congress allowed black men to become Union soldiers. This was much to the persuasion of Frederick Douglass to Abraham Lincoln to allow this to happen. Black troops typically served under white officers and therefore suffered higher death rates than white troops. Again, they were infantry. They were put into battle. They were in more dangerous situations. They did not have nearly the amount of health care or resources that white soldiers had. They were paid a lot less. And if they were captured by the Confederacy, they were typically either killed or sent back into slavery. Overall, 186,000 African Americans served in the Union Army, and this is just one of the all-black battalions in the Civil War. Some of the major leaders in the Union, obviously Abraham Lincoln, who was the president. And again, his main focus or his main goal was to preserve the Union. So whatever he could do to preserve the Union, keep it together. Ulysses S. Grant was the Union general. He was not the first choice as general. Again, we also wanted General Lee. But Lincoln was known for saying that he was the right man for the job. He had a very strong will. He was good at planning. He tended to win crucial battles and eventually wore down the Confederate Army. William T. Sherman was another Union general, and he was known for Sherman's March. And what he did in the South was he completely destroyed and burned everything from Atlanta to Savannah as him and his troops marched through that part of Georgia. Frederick Douglass, we talked about him in our last unit, but he was a former slave, abolitionist, speaker, and writer. He helped Northerners recognize the injustice of slavery because of his writing. He, again, like I said earlier, was the one that convinced Lincoln to recruit former slaves. Leaders of the Confederate. Robert E. Lee, again, was a very famous general. He was a respected officer before the war, and because he didn't want to go against Virginia is why he ended up fighting for the South. However, he did urge the Southerners to surrender and unite as one. Stonewall Jackson was another Confederate general, and the reason why he got his name is because he stand like a stone wall. He was not easily intimidated. The first major event of the Civil War, after not including the battles, was the Emancipation Proclamation, which was written and delivered on January of 1863. And this happened after the Battle of Antietam. President Lincoln did not want to give this unless he had a feeling that we could win the war. After we won the Battle of Antietam, it was the bloodiest day. He felt like that gave them enough motivation to win the war. So that was the first reason behind giving this. The second reason was now this made the war about slavery. The British were interested in supporting the South during the war, which obviously we did not want to happen. However, the British were very much against slavery. So if we made the war about slavery, the British would not intervene, which would be the second reason as to why the Emancipation Proclamation was delivered, was because it allowed the British to stay out of the war because they didn't want to be involved in a war against slavery. Now, the other important thing about this is the Emancipation Proclamation only declared the slaves in the territories rebelling against the Union free. So it did not free every slave. It freed the slaves in the South, in the Confederacy. Oh, wrong direction. The second major document or declaration was the Gettysburg Address, and this was given in November of 1863. Remember, Gettysburg was a big turning point in the war. It started off with the 77 years ago. The reason why he gave it was because he wanted to remember those who lost their lives. Again, it was a very bloody, long battle. And the reason why this is important is because it stressed that Lincoln's, again, main focus was that he wanted to preserve the nation. He wanted to make the Union strong. He wanted to continue to be one country, not two separate nations. And that is the importance behind the Gettysburg Address.